Hi there. My name is Eric Gold, and what I'm about to present is not a sales framework. It's not a discovery technique. It's not a new qualification model dressed up with better language. This is a manifesto. It's my manifesto of how I do sales. It's a rejection of a deeply embedded assumption in modern sales, the idea that sales is a science, that if we discover the right mechanics, the right questions, the right stages, we can manufacture conviction and predict outcomes. I don't believe conviction works that way. And I don't believe trust forms on a schedule. And I don't believe truth needs to be pushed forward by pressure. Sales should move forward because something real has clicked for the customer, because their understanding has changed, because they now see something they didn't see before. When that happens, momentum doesn't need to be pushed, it gets pulled. If a deal requires push, real push, that's not a signal to push harder. It's a signal that clarity has not landed yet. The dominant belief in modern sales organizations is simple and pervasive. Sales is a science. There are methodologies, certifications, playbooks, proven discovery questions, and defined stages. The promise is predictability. If you execute the method correctly, results should follow. When results don't follow, the explanation is always the same: poor execution, insufficient discipline, or the need for a better framework. What rarely gets questioned is the premise itself, the belief that selling, a deeply human, emotional, contextual process, behaves like a reproducible system. Every legitimate science passes one fundamental test: reproducibility. Apply the same method under similar conditions, you should get similar outcomes. Not identical, but consistent enough that the method itself is predictive. This is what separates science from ritual. This is how we know chemistry works. This is how we know engineering works. If sales truly were a science, this test would hold. Now look at sales honestly. Different reps follow the same methodology, same training, same decks, same approved questions. The outcomes are wildly different. Some reps consistently create conviction. Some create friction. Some never get traction at all. This pattern persists no matter which framework you adopt. The method is not the determining variable. So the real question is, if the method isn't causing success, then what is? People are not variables. Conviction doesn't arise because a script was followed. Trust doesn't form because a stage was advanced. Curiosity doesn't appear because a box was checked. Great reps don't win because they execute steps better. They win because they create clarity. They help the buyer see something true, something that reframes how they understand their world. Once that happens, movement follows naturally. Despite this reality, organizations cling to control. Sales VPs cling to control. They hide behind the methodology because it makes them seem like they are in control. Funnels feel safe. Stages feel measurable. Activity feels like progress. The control mechanisms explain everything while predicting nothing. But activity is not understanding. You can fill calendars, advance stages, and stack meetings, all without the buyer's thinking changing even slightly. Control systems reward motion, not meaning. That's how teams end up with busy looking pipelines and fragile deals. Before we dive into specific tactics, I want to name what we're rejecting. These 5 practices are considered best practices in most sales organizations. They're taught in training, they're embedded in CRM workflows, they're required by management, and they are all fundamentally broken. The tactics are interrogation as a technique for qualifying opportunities, budget questions as gatekeeping to decide which deals to pursue, pushing hard, very hard for POCs, early pricing discussions, and seller-driven momentum. Each of these tactics prioritizes seller control over buyer clarity. Each one optimizes for the appearance of progress rather than actual understanding. We're going to dismantle them one by one. This is going to be fun. This is where I draw a hard line. I am against interrogation as the default posture of early sales. Extracting budget, authority, timelines, and pain before teaching anything meaningful turns buyers into prey. It creates defensiveness. It produces unreliable answers, and it destroys curiosity. Early in a deal, customers often don't know what they think yet. Our job is not to interrogate. Our job is to teach. Qualification should emerge from clarity, not pressure. And I want to be very precise here. I am not advocating for dumping all information on the table immediately. That would be irresponsible and ineffective. Sequence matters and relevance matters. Timing matters. The ethical question is not whether the seller knows more than the buyer. Of course they do. The ethical question is how that asymmetry is used. Teaching guides understanding. Weaponizing asymmetry exploits uncertainty. Those are fundamentally different acts. Sequence means revealing information when it becomes relevant. Manipulation means letting misunderstanding persist because it benefits us. These are not the same. Information asymmetry is unavoidable. The seller will always know things the buyer doesn't. That's normal. What's not ethical is using that asymmetry to force premature decisions. If a deal needs darkness to survive, it isn't real. This is the doctrine that governs everything else. We distinguish between lying, manipulation, and bravery. Lying is stating something false. Manipulation is allowing something false to persist because correcting it would hurt the deal. Brave honesty is choosing clarity even when it costs leverage. If correcting the buyer's understanding would hurt the deal, then the deal deserves to be hurt. We believe in sequence, but we do not protect momentum at the expense of truth. This is a character standard, not a tactic. We would rather lose a deal by being brave and honest than win one by letting misunderstanding persist. And when it comes to budget, I'm sorry, but I disagree with the accepted practice of asking customers what their budget is. My strategy is not to delay asking about budget. I simply don't ask at all. Our price should not depend upon the customer's budget. Price is a function of what the thing is, what it does, the value it creates, the risk it removes, and the cost to deliver it. Budget may matter later for negotiation, packaging, or timing, but it should never determine what the thing costs. Also, no one ever has budget for products in new categories. Accept that fact, take a risk, and explain what your product does. Don't ask about budget. When you ask for budget early, you reframe the conversation. Early budget questions turn insight into bargaining before insight exists. Truth becomes negotiation before truth has landed. Buyers respond defensively, not honestly. That doesn't qualify seriousness. It manufactures distortion. Proof of concept only works when it's pulled, not pushed. When we push a POC too early, we're not creating insight, we're creating activity. Checklists get filled, dashboards light up. Everyone feels busy, but nothing meaningful has been learned. A pushed POC becomes theater. It lets people say, we're evaluating, without ever confronting why the evaluation matters. The goal isn't to prove that the product works. That's table stakes. The goal is belief. So we teach first how the problem actually behaves, why existing approaches fail, what should be true if a better system existed. Only once that belief forms does a POC become useful. At that point, the POC isn't persuasion, it's validation. They're not asking us to prove value, they're asking us to confirm what they already understand. When the buyer asks for the POC, everything changes. Now it's not convince me, it's I see it. Help me validate it in my world and bring others along. That's ownership forming. A buyer-driven POC is also operationally healthier. The customer will involve real stakeholders, ask real questions, and define what success looks like because they care about the outcome, not the theater. That's why I always wait for the customer to pull the POC, to ask for it. When they pull, the deal is being propelled by their enthusiasm, which is the only momentum I trust. Price is not just a number, it's a frame. The moment price enters the conversation, the customer's brain shifts gears. They stop exploring meaning and start comparing. They stop asking, is this true? And start asking, is this worth it relative to other things? That's not irrational, that's human. But it becomes destructive when it happens too early, before conviction exists. Early price discussion reframes the conversation into negotiation before the customer has internalized the value. Meaning collapses into cost. That's why I don't lead with price. I let price arrive when the customer is ready to contextualize it. Usually when they ask. If the customer wants ballpark pricing, they must first answer questions to clearly define their usage scope. The customer must invest. They must give information to get a price. After conviction exists, pricing behaves differently. Now it's not adversarial, it's practical. The buyer isn't asking, is this real anymore? They're asking, how do we make it work? Price becomes a conversation about fit. Packaging, rollout, scope, procurement mechanics, not a debate about whether the value exists. This is what I mean when I say conviction protects pricing. When the customer truly wants the outcome, pricing is a design discussion, not a tug of war. Price does not prove value. It tells you where the value fits once you already believe it matters. This is where most sales damage happens: momentum. Seller-driven momentum is often anxiety wearing a blazer. Next steps. Let's keep things moving. Can we get time on the calendar? Those phrases can sound professional, but they frequently function as pressure. Pressure produces compliance. The buyer agrees to meetings and nods politely, but their understanding hasn't deepened. Deals built on compliance are fragile. They stall late, they require discounts, they churn after signing because the internal conviction never existed. You cannot schedule conviction. If you have to push the deal forward, it's a signal to go back upstream and restore clarity. And for the purposes of clarity, I'll explain this image. That's a cat getting its nails clipped, so we're forcing compliance on the cat. Real momentum feels completely different. It doesn't feel like chasing. It feels like being pulled. The buyer asks the next question without prompting. They bring in stakeholders because they want those people to see what they saw. They start discussing implications and operational reality. In that mode, your job is not to push. Your job is to respond, to answer curiosity with clarity. When curiosity exists, momentum becomes inevitable. That's the only kind of momentum I trust, because it's powered by the buyer's internal yes, not the seller's external pressure. Let's make this tangible. This approach doesn't mean being vague. It doesn't mean avoiding hard topics, and it doesn't mean refusing to guide. Instead of asking the customer, what's your budget? Say, teams usually find that once this is visible, priorities shift. I'm curious, does this problem already have gravity internally, or are we still discovering whether it matters? Instead of pushing a POC, say, at some point people usually want to see it in their own environment. We don't need to rush that. You'll know when it becomes useful. Instead of leading with price, say, pricing only makes sense once we're aligned that this truly matters. Let's stay with the problem long enough that we're not negotiating shadows. Instead of forcing next steps, ask, what feels like the natural next question for you? The through line, the summary of all this is respect sequence, teach clearly, and let curiosity pull. This approach demands more from reps, not less. It requires insight, the ability to understand what matters and articulate it crisply. It requires a teaching mindset, the ability to reframe the customer's world, not just present features. It requires comfort with silence because you're not filling every gap with pressure or next steps. One of my mentors used to tell me, Eric, imagine you have a zipper on your mouth and just wait for the customer to speak. And this approach requires judgment because you can't hide behind scripts and processes and methodologies when your only North Star should be clarity. This is why this philosophy raises the hiring bar. You're looking for people who can think, teach, and stay calm. People who can lose a deal without panicking because they know that false momentum is worse than no momentum. This doesn't scale through tighter process. It scales through talent density, through taste, through good judgment. Perhaps you could call it wisdom. This is where people push back. And the pushback is reasonable. People might say, if you don't interrogate early, how do you qualify? Or if you don't push next steps, aren't you wasting time? Or if you don't enforce stages, how do you forecast? My answer? Qualification still happens. It just happens through the right signals. I qualify for curiosity. I qualify for problem gravity. I qualify for whether the buyer's mind is moving and whether they are pulling others into the conversation. If those signals never appear, that is qualification. On time. The biggest waste isn't deals that don't close. The biggest waste is deals that move forward without conviction and die late after weeks of meetings and internal effort. On forecasting. Forecasting based on seller-driven momentum is a comforting illusion. I call it pretend sales because buyer-driven momentum is harder to spreadsheet, but it's far more predictive. When buyers pull, deals close. When sellers push, forecasts lie. So I'm not rejecting qualification and forecasting. I'm rejecting fake qualification and fake forecasting that mistake motion for truth. Here's the declaration in plain language. I reject sales as dogma. I reject sales as manipulation. And I reject the fantasy that sales is a science. I choose clarity over control. I choose symmetry over leverage. I choose enthusiasm over extraction. I don't want compliance. I want conviction. If a deal requires interrogation to stay alive, it's not a real deal yet. If a deal requires pressure to advance, something upstream didn't land. My standard is simple. Teach until the customer sees the truth clearly enough that they start polling. And if they don't poll, I would rather lose the deal than manufacture momentum through tactics. That is my rebellion. My name is Eric Gold, and it has been a pleasure presenting to you today.